I thought I was just in trouble for missing a meeting, but when my boss closed the door behind me, I realized this wasn't about work anymore. The office was almost silent when I finally looked up from my screen and realized everyone else had gone home. The hum of the air conditioner was the only thing keeping the room from feeling hollow. My wristwatch showed a time I didn't want to believe. The meeting I was supposed to attend had ended hours ago. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. My first month at this new job and I'd already slipped up. I could still hear the buzz of that calendar reminder I'd ignored earlier in the afternoon. Telling myself I'd finish just one more email before heading to the conference room. I didn't even notice the time pass. The rows of empty desks around me were faintly lit by the dim ceiling lights. Outside the tall windows, the city's night lights glowed like scattered stars. I was thinking of how I'd explain myself in the morning when I heard the sound of measured footsteps behind me. I turned and saw her. Ms. Reyes, my manager. She stood at the entrance of the office, framed by the faint light spilling from the hallway. She wasn't angry, at least not in the way I had imagined. There was a calmness about her, though her eyes carried a steadiness that made me feel smaller than I wanted to admit. "You missed a meeting," she said. Her voice was low, even, but the slight pause between the words felt heavier than a raised voice would have. I opened my mouth, then closed it. No excuse felt good enough. I know. I'm sorry. I lost track of time. Her gaze stayed on me a moment longer, her arms loosely crossed as if she was deciding how to respond. The faint lines at the corners of her eyes didn't seem like marks of age tonight. They felt more like traces of the long day she must have had. She sighed, not with frustration, but with something quieter, almost like she was choosing not to let her disappointment spill over. "We'll talk about it later." Then she stepped further inside, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, and stopped by the side of my desk. The closeness made me notice things I hadn't before. The subtle scent of her perfume, light and warm. The way a few strands of her dark hair had slipped loose from the knot at the back of her head. How the pale light from the monitor brushed against her cheekbones. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't harsh either. It felt like the air between us had shifted, as if the space had gone from a regular office to something more private, more delicate. "Pack up," she said finally, her tone softer. "We're not done with this conversation." She turned and walked toward the hallway. I watched her go, feeling the weight of both my mistake and the unspoken expectation in her voice. The sound of her steps faded, leaving me alone again with the quiet office, and the knowledge that tonight wasn't over yet. The building was quieter than I'd ever heard it. By the time I stepped out of the elevator, most of the lights in the upper floors were already dimmed for the night. My footsteps felt loud in the long hallway as I made my way toward her office. She had asked me to meet her after hours. Her message, brief and without emojis, had arrived just as I was gathering my things to leave. "Come to my office. We need to talk." I stood for a moment outside the glass door that bore her name in neat silver letters. The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish, and somewhere down the corridor, a vacuum cleaner hummed as the cleaning crew worked. I drew in a breath, knocked lightly, and waited. "Come in," came her voice, low and steady, but not unkind. The door clicked softly as I pushed it open. Her office felt like an entirely different world from the open workspace. The overhead lights were off. Instead, a soft lamp on the corner desk cast a warm, amber glow over the room. A small pot of jasmine by the window released a faint, fresh scent that mixed with the sharper notes of her perfume. On a low table to one side sat 2 mugs and a still steaming teapot. She was seated at her desk, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, as she finished writing something in a leather-bound planner. Her posture was straight, but there was something in the way her shoulders dipped slightly forward that made her look more like a person at home with their thoughts than a boss preparing to scold an employee. When she looked up, the lamplight caught in her eyes, softening them. She removed her glasses and set them aside, folding her hands gently on the desk. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just studied me in that calm, assessing way of hers. "Sit down," she said finally, gesturing to the chair opposite her. I obeyed, conscious of the way the leather seat creaked softly as I settled into it. I noticed the faint smile lines at the corners of her eyes, the ones that seemed less like signs of age and more like traces of laughter long stored away. "You missed the meeting," she began, her tone clipped, professional. "That can't happen again." "I know," I said quietly. "It won't. I'm still adjusting." She tilted her head slightly, studying my face as if weighing the sincerity of my words. Then, almost imperceptibly, her voice softened. "What was it that kept you? Workload? Distraction?" I hesitated, then admitted, "I lost track of time. I wanted to get things right, and I ended up staying at my desk too long." For a heartbeat, her gaze drifted down, and her fingers brushed the rim of her teacup as if in thought. When she looked back at me, her expression was no longer just that of a manager. There was something quieter, more reflective. "This job can swallow you whole if you let it," she said gently. "I know that better than anyone." The way she said it, not as a reprimand but almost as a confession, shifted something in the air between us. The office, with its soft lamplight and faint jasmine scent, felt suddenly less like a workplace and more like a space where a real conversation could happen. She let the silence stretch, and for a moment the only sound in the office was the faint ticking of the wall clock. I sat across from her, feeling the weight of the air between us. It wasn't heavy with anger. It was something else, something harder to name. Finally, she leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting lightly on the desk. The lamplight curved along the edge of her jaw, and I noticed how her fingers wrapped around the ceramic mug in front of her. Steady, deliberate, like she was grounding herself. "You know," she began slowly, "being late or missing a meeting doesn't ruin your career. What does is making people wonder if they can rely on you." Her words weren't sharp, but they landed with precision. I nodded, my throat tight. "I understand. I don't want to be that kind of person." She studied me for a long moment. Her eyes didn't waver, and yet, behind their firmness, there was a flicker of something gentler, maybe recognition. She set her mug down and folded her hands together, resting them just a few inches from mine on the desk. "Tell me," she said softly, "what distracted you today?" I hesitated, feeling the familiar urge to make up something polished. But her tone disarmed me. There was no judgment in it, only a quiet insistence. I swallowed and let the truth slip out. "I think—" I paused, searching for the right words. "I've been worried that I don't belong here, like I'm trying too hard to prove myself, and somehow it just slips away from me." The admission hung in the air. For a moment I thought I saw her shoulders ease, as though I'd spoken aloud something she understood too well. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her gaze dropped to the notes spread across her desk, but I knew she wasn't really reading them. Her hand lifted slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair back behind her ear, and when she looked at me again, her expression had shifted. "You're better than you think," she said at last, her voice quieter now. "But no one will know that if you keep hiding behind excuses. Showing up, even imperfectly, matters more than being flawless in silence." Her words hit me harder than I expected. They weren't the sort of advice that came from a manual. They felt lived-in, personal. I nodded slowly, feeling both seen and slightly exposed. For a moment, the room grew still again. She didn't look away. Her eyes held mine with a steadiness that wasn't about authority anymore. It was about connection. The silence between us wasn't awkward this time. It felt grounding, like something fragile but important was taking shape. The clock ticked on, filling the spaces our words couldn't reach. And in that quiet, I realized this conversation wasn't just about a missed meeting. It was about something deeper, something neither of us was fully ready to name yet. For a while after that, we both stayed quiet. The soft patter of rain began against the window, a gentle rhythm that filled the space where words might have gone. I sat still, unsure if the conversation was over or if something more was coming. Ms. Reyes shifted slightly in her chair, her eyes wandering toward the rain-streaked glass. Her expression softened in that half-lit profile. Still composed, but no longer carrying the sharpness of a manager correcting a junior. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before, as if she were talking more to herself than to me. "You know," she began, tracing the edge of her teacup with a fingertip, "when I called you in tonight, it wasn't just about the meeting." I blinked, surprised. I waited, not wanting to interrupt. "I suppose I was frustrated," she continued, her eyes still fixed on the rain outside. "Not just at you. At myself, at the way this job sometimes makes everything feel like a transaction. Meetings, reports, deadlines. It's easy to forget there are people behind all of it." Her words hung there for a moment, absorbed by the hush of the room. I shifted forward slightly in my seat without meaning to, my elbows resting on my knees as I leaned closer. Not in any bold way, just a natural pull toward someone letting down their guard. "I didn't realize," I said softly. "You always seem in control." That brought the faintest smile to her lips, not amused, but almost wistful. She finally turned her gaze back to me, and in that moment, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. The tiredness behind her eyes, the weight she carried in the way her shoulders sloped ever so slightly. "Control is an illusion," she said, with a small shake of her head. "Some days it's just habit. You keep going because you don't know what else to do." I wanted to say something reassuring, but for a moment, words failed me. Instead, I just watched as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. A simple gesture that somehow made her seem more human than any speech could. "You know what's strange?" she added after a pause. "I didn't call you here tonight to scold you. I just wanted to talk to someone who isn't expecting me to have all the answers." That admission caught me off guard. I felt something shift in my chest. A quiet recognition that the space between us wasn't just about age or position anymore. It was two people sitting across from each other, both a little lost in their own ways. "I'm glad you did," I said finally, my voice low. "I mean, I'm here. You don't always have to have all the answers." For a second, she looked as if she might say more, but instead she simply nodded, her eyes lingering on mine a moment longer than necessary before drifting back to the rain. The office felt smaller than, not claustrophobic but contained, like the walls themselves were holding this unexpected exchange, keeping it safe from the rest of the world. The rain outside had slowed to a soft drizzle, leaving streaks on the window that shimmered under the distant city lights. The office felt almost like a cocoon, dim, warm, and strangely apart from the world beyond the glass. For a while, we both sat in silence again. I'd expected the conversation to circle back to work, but it didn't. It was as if we'd stepped outside the usual boundaries, and neither of us quite knew how to go back. Ms. Reyes shifted in her chair, turning slightly so she could face me more directly. She rested one elbow on the armrest and propped her chin lightly on her hand. Her posture relaxed in a way I had never seen during the day. The lamplight traced a soft line along her cheekbone, highlighting the quiet steadiness of her expression. "You know," she said after a moment, her voice softer now, almost conversational, "it's been a long time since I've talked to someone at work like this. Usually, people just nod and wait for instructions." I smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just bad at nodding. That earned a quiet laugh from her. A low, warm sound that broke the stillness like a ripple on calm water. She shook her head gently, as if at herself, and the corners of her eyes crinkled ever so slightly. "Don't lose that," she said, her tone carrying something more than casual praise. "That honesty, it's rare." I lowered my gaze for a second, suddenly aware of the warmth creeping into my chest. I'd come here expecting a reprimand. Instead, I felt as though we were sharing something private, something delicate. She reached for the teapot on the side table and poured another half cup, sliding it toward me. Her fingers brushed against mine as she set it down. Just a fleeting touch, but it was enough to make me still for an instant. Her hand lingered, almost as if she'd realized the contact but hadn't rushed to pull away. The warmth of her skin against the back of my fingers was light yet unmistakable. A small human connection that felt bigger than it should have. I looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no smile on her face now, only a kind of calm sincerity. She withdrew her hand slowly, not abruptly, and returned it to her lap as though nothing unusual had happened. "Thank you," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure if I was thanking her for the tea, for the touch, or for trusting me enough to share this moment. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes but softened them nonetheless. "You listen better than you realize," she replied. For a few seconds, the silence between us felt full, not empty. The distance across the desk didn't seem as wide as it had when I first sat down. I sipped the tea slowly, feeling the warmth seep into my palms through the cup. The lamplight cast gentle shadows on the walls, and the soft sound of the rain against the glass made the whole office feel hushed, almost sacred in its quiet. That was when I understood that something had shifted, not in any dramatic or obvious way, but in the simple ease of how we were sitting together. It wasn't the closeness of colleagues anymore, and yet it wasn't anything we needed to name. It was just there, unspoken, fragile, and all the more real because of it. By the time the rain outside had stopped, the office felt as though it belonged only to us. The glass panes were streaked with silver lines, catching the glow of distant traffic lights from the streets below. The city had gone quiet in that late hour, leaving just the soft hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of papers as we began gathering our things. She rose from her chair and crossed to the low bookshelf near the window, pulling out a thin folder and sliding a few notes inside. I joined her at the desk to help collect the loose papers that had scattered during the day. For a while, neither of us said much. The quiet wasn't awkward anymore. It had shifted into something more companionable, like we were moving in the same rhythm. Every so often, our hands brushed as we both reached for the same document. The touches were brief, unintentional, but each time I felt the faintest hitch in my breath, as though I'd been caught off guard by something as simple as the warmth of her skin against mine. When we'd stacked the last of the papers, I noticed her pausing by the window. She rested one hand lightly on the sill, her posture tall but relaxed, her reflection faintly visible against the darkened glass. The streetlights behind her gave her hair a soft outline, making her look more like a figure in a painting than the sharp, commanding manager I'd known. I stepped closer, but not too close, just enough to stand beside her, leaving the right amount of space. For a moment we both watched the wet city below, cars moving like fireflies through the mist. "You did well tonight," she said quietly, her eyes still on the window. "Not because of the work, but because you stayed honest." I wasn't sure what to say to that. I shifted slightly, my hands resting loosely in my pockets. "I think it's easier to be honest when someone's willing to listen." That made her glance at me, and our eyes met in the glass's reflection. The look she gave wasn't a smile, but there was a softness to it, the kind that felt like an acknowledgement rather than an answer. "You're going to do fine here," she said after a pause. "But don't rush yourself, and don't let this place take all of you." The way she said it, the gentle warning in her tone, made me wonder if she was talking as much to herself as to me. I nodded slowly. "I'll try not to." Another quiet stretch followed. The faint sound of rainwater dripping from the roof filled the silence. I could feel the closeness of her presence beside me. Not overwhelming, just quietly there. A warmth that somehow reached across the small space we'd left between us. Finally, she pushed away from the window and turned to face me. Her expression was calm, composed again, but her voice was softer than it had been all evening. "Let's not rush anything," she said. The words weren't about the project or the office. I heard it in the tone. It was about us, about whatever unspoken thing had begun to take shape between us. I nodded once more, understanding without needing to ask for more. There was no need for grand declarations. In that moment, restraint felt like its own kind of closeness. As we left the office together, locking the door behind us, I realized that the night hadn't just been about a missed meeting or a late conversation. Something had shifted, quietly, like the way dawn arrives before the light breaks. A week passed, and the rhythm of the office settled back into its usual hum. Morning greetings, the soft buzz of computers, the muted shuffle of papers. Yet, beneath the ordinary sounds, something between us had shifted. It wasn't visible to anyone else, but I felt it in the way her presence no longer carried the same invisible wall. That morning, I arrived early, hoping to get a head start on a few reports. The sky outside was still pale with dawn, and the city was slow to wake. As I settled at my desk, the quiet clink of porcelain made me look up. Ms. Reyes stood there, holding out a cup of coffee. It wasn't the strong, dark brew the office machine churned out. I could smell the faint sweetness of the blend she usually kept in her own cupboard. The steam rose in thin, curling threads between us. "Figured you'd need this," she said simply, setting the cup down beside my keyboard. I managed a grateful smile. "Thank you. I didn't expect—" "You've been putting in the effort," she said, cutting off my words but in a tone that was warm rather than dismissive. "Consider it encouragement." For a moment I just looked at her, unsure if she realized what that small gesture meant to me. It wasn't the coffee itself, it was the quiet acknowledgement behind it. In that moment, she wasn't the boss giving instructions. She was just someone who'd noticed. As the day went on, we fell back into the usual rhythm of work. Reviewing reports, exchanging brief nods across the office, small smiles that no one else seemed to catch. But there was a new ease between us, like a note of music softly humming under the ordinary sounds of the day. That evening, as people began to pack up and the office gradually emptied, we found ourselves alone again near the big window that overlooked the city. The sky was brushed with the faint orange and pink of sunset, the buildings below casting long shadows. She handed me a folder we'd been working on and let her fingers rest lightly on the edge of it, just brushing against my own. The touch was brief, almost casual, but it carried the quiet familiarity that had grown between us since that rainy night. "You've come a long way in just a few weeks," she said. Her eyes held mine for a heartbeat before she added, more softly, "Keep it up. You'll be fine." There was something in her gaze. Not a promise, not a declaration, but a steadiness that felt like it belonged to both of us. I found myself smiling back, not because I had to, but because it felt natural. When it was time to leave, we walked side by side toward the elevator. As we reached the doors, she touched my arm lightly. A brief, grounding gesture and said, "See you tomorrow." That simple phrase, in her voice, carried more warmth than I would have expected. As the elevator descended, I thought about how the distance between us hadn't disappeared overnight. It hadn't been crossed by dramatic words or grand gestures. It had shifted, gently, through small choices. A conversation in the quiet, a hand that lingered a moment too long, a cup of coffee placed on a desk at dawn. And as the city lights came into view again, I realized that sometimes, the beginnings of something meaningful don't arrive with fanfare. They begin quietly, in the spaces between ordinary days, and grow in the silence where both people have chosen to stay. If you enjoyed this slow burn story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt age gap romances. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know which moment touched you most.